My name is Rita Finlay. I'm currently studying for my Masters in Educational Leadership. As part of my studies, I'm required to review a leadership book of substance, having just completed another unit at university called Faith Leadership under the instruction of Dr. Christine Cameron. I became curious and very much interested in the concept of servant leadership, and so I've chosen a book by Dr. Cameron called Leadership as a Call to Service. It's a book that reflects on the lives of Teresa of Avila, Catherine of Siena and Therese of Lisieux, who are distinctly called Doctors of the Universal Church. Cameron notes these women responded to the Gospel's call to service and communicated this servanthood through their leadership practices. My specific interest in servant leadership is based on the terms identified by Larry Spears, an advocate of Robert Greenleaf, who is the leader in the concept of servant leadership, and one who believes the essence of leadership is service. Spears' terms are referred to as the 10 core characteristics of servant leadership throughout Cameron's book. These 10 core characteristics include listening, empathy, healing, awareness, persuasion, perceptualizing, foresight, stewardship, commitment to the growth of people, and lastly, building community. Cameron refers to the 10 core characteristics of leadership. She relates these to the lives of the 3 women doctors of the church, Teresa, Catherine, and Therese. Throughout this review, I will refer to these 10 core characteristics in relationship to my experiences as a faith leader. My reason for choosing this book stems from my current role in faith leadership as a sacramental program coordinator within our pastoral region, which sees on average 128 students receive a sacrament per year. These students come to us from both Catholic and state schools from within the region. The preparation of these students is a monumental and time-consuming task, which I complete on a voluntary basis. But for me, it's about being called and responding to that call, a key concept from the 2005 document by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops called Co-Workers in the Vineyard of the Lord. In this document, it states, like Jesus, we are called to serve and not to be served. And so this is where the strong connection is for me with the same concept that Cameron is bringing to light in her book. Cameron explains how servant leadership has been key in history and on all points of the compass of the globe. In the West, Jesus Christ is a prominent example of servant leadership. Obviously, in my faith leadership role, Jesus Christ is also the model of servant leadership that I follow, and one which directs my service. I was particularly captivated by a quote in reference to this in Cameron's book by James Hunter. He speaks of the author H.G. Wells, who, as a historian and an atheist, Wells is quoted as saying that he believes that Jesus Christ is easily the most dominant figure in all history. So in my role as faith leader and referring to the descriptions discussed by Cameron about the 10 core characteristics of servant leadership, I firstly start with the characteristic of listening. What is important in this characteristic is the ability for the leader to listen to the quiet during the time of busyness and taking time to listen to others as well as their own needs. In our active and chaotic world, the leader is the centre of this chaos, and the ears that hear the clarity needed to find an inner calm so that, as Spears suggests, we are then able to find a balance of the body, the mind and the soul. Teresa of Avila became familiar with this inner voice after being influenced by one of the nuns at the convent where she boarded. This nun took time to sit and listen to Teresa and held holy conversations with her. Cameron explains that Teresa thought that many blessings were obtained from mental prayer and listening to God, and that balancing body, mind and soul is an important strategy when implementing servant leadership. For me, as a sacramental program coordinator, it's about listening to the community and addressing their needs and questions, especially for those who have been absent from the church for quite some time. Empathy is key to building relationships, as it just doesn't refer to feelings of sorrow for others as found in sympathy, but it suggests a reaction of doing something, putting yourself in someone's situation and responding by a deed. In leadership, empathy is about meeting the needs of others and of yourself, and doing so with integrity, with respect, employing compassion and with utmost trust. A servant leader encourages the whole organisation to work together, directed by these values, particularly of trust. Catherine of Siena's greatest and possibly most famous example of empathy is a time when a young man from Siena was sentenced to death by beheading. Catherine spent much time in reflection and prayer and preparation for this to happen to him alongside this young man. She led him to the place of execution and stayed with him during his execution. He had his sins forgiven, received communion, something he hadn't done for a long time. It is said that his last words were Yesur and Katerina, as at the point Catherine received his head in her hands. No greater show of compassion and dignity than at a time of death. Her respect for this man was arguably the greatest show of empathic servant leadership. Interestingly, the third core characteristic of leadership is healing, and refers to the healing of the complete human being, the physical, the psychological and the spiritual. In workplaces where there is much stress and those who are overworked, it's important that the leader finds time to heal themselves in every part, so as to ensure the whole is capable of servicing others and themselves. Therese of Lisieux was an example of someone who suffered many health issues in her life, a very short life of just 23 years. During this time, she also lost her mother. Healing through prayer and contemplation with God gave Therese power and courage to face what it was that needed healing. It also encouraged her to help other sisters who were suffering physically, psychologically or mentally, and to understand their suffering, a key element in servant leadership. As a faith leader, the characteristic of awareness is of great significance, especially when we relate it to the definition given to us by Greenleaf, where he suggests spiritual awareness is a spiritual awakening, a belief that the highest level of religious experience is an awareness of oneness with the mystery, the feeling of awe and wonder. A servant leader sees awareness as a tool to bring harmony and diversity to the forefront of human relationships, to celebrate and act ethically to achieve unity with oneself, and as Cameron calls it, the global village, which in turn will create oneness with the mystery. Awareness also involves cultural awareness, and literally a leader who is aware of their own cultural identity and that of those within the group. In her book, Cameron states that Catherine of Siena's own capacity for awareness was cultivated through her intuitive insight, through her knowledge of the spirituality of the times, through her mystical experiences, and through general, spiritual and self-awareness. From here we move to the core characteristic of persuasion. Persuasion is not about coerciveness or manipulation when discussing it in servant leadership. Persuasion is more finding a common ground and an accord with others around you. Teresa was a great example of a leader who led by persuasion and not by a position of power. Many witnessed her ability to persuade through her writing, her personality that often led to support her works. So many witnesses came forward to discuss her persuasive leadership. In fact, 144 testimonies at her canonisation. Conceptualisation explains how leaders see the bigger picture, having a vision and striving for excellence. Conceptualisation in servant leadership is being able to see this big picture, but still not void of the everyday running of the organisation, and particularly not void of the people around them. It's about being a visionary, but not at the expense of others, rather with the assistance of others. In her book, Cameron exemplifies Catherine's dream for the future of a united and a reformed church, especially the clergy. She was devoted to the poor, the sick and the marginalised, but her dream was to have solitude with God, quiet times with Him. And even her big dream and concept of the reformed church didn't overshadow those around her who needed her help in the everyday. Foresight accelerates the difference for me personally between a leader and one of a servant leader. Foresight and its close cousin conceptualisation is about being able to bring the past, the present and the future together to make decisions based on perspectives, anticipation of something and intuition. A leader using this core characteristic is creative in their decision making and their judgment. It relies on the leader's conscience too when deciding whether an action is needed or not, whether a comment should be said or not, or whether a conversation should be had or not. Trust and relationships between leaders and followers are also a very influential consequence of foresight. Therese of Lisieux showed much foresight through the visions and apparitions she saw. Foresight to foresee her father's mental ailment later in life, visions of Our Lady to relieve her of any pain, and her prophecy that her life would influence well past her death. Foresight as a core characteristic of servant leadership creates trust between the leaders and the others around them. Stewardship is about upkeeping and maintaining the resources and the human resources of any place or organisation. Servant leadership encourages trust and entrusts others to maintain the stewardship from one leader to the next. Resources have been entrusted to a leader, including those of creation, and as servant leaders we should learn to advocate for the care and respect of something and creation which has been commended to us. Teresa saw the need to re-energise the Carmelite order and build new convents. This is her action of stewardship. She recognised the contributions of the past members, but felt the need to bring change to the present so as to keep the growth of the order for the future. A custodian of the order was Teresa. A servant leader is aware of the needs of all, including themselves. Their commitment is to better those around them and reflect on their own needs of growth. A servant leader believes in the interaction of all at all levels of service within the organisation. A servant leader focuses on developing the spirit in the person so as to nurture the whole being. This will allow others to grow to be the best they can be in a supportive environment. Cameron explains this well about Therese when she states that she said, "I scatter the good seed that God gives me among my little birds and then let events take their course without worrying any more about the outcome." Therese was one who respected others around her. She was also given the responsibility for praying for 2 missionary priests. She was not assigned just to leadership within the sisters group that she was a part of. The last core characteristic of servant leadership is building community. This is about members of a team empowering each other to reach their full potential, including spiritual potential. In faith leadership, I relate to Greenleaf's suggestion that my direction and support in the sacramental program is capable of bringing together many servant leaders who would then become a force to bring about the common good through necessary organisations such as our schools and churches. For me, this is what my role in faith leadership is about. By being a servant leader to those in my school and extended parish communities, I hope and pray to build a community of faith, of support, of growth and of commitment. The 3 doctors of the Church that Cameron so explicitly details in her book are examples of building community. As a humble but modern-day female faith leader, they have been inspirational in my understanding of what it is to be a servant leader. That is, to be of service to others through my ministry.